coherent way. So as you can see, ChatGPT and other large language models are really good at putting everything into a coherent written way with a nice outline and bullet points and um, a helpful organization. So of course, my final proof argument won't look exactly like this, but sometimes it's nice to get something to start with. And more things that AI can help us with writing is to organize our source materials. And if we do the work of organizing our source materials first, then that's even better because then we can provide that research log or timeline as a structured spreadsheet to the AI models, and they can transform our timeline into sentences and paragraphs and sections. They are really good at putting things into sentences and paragraphs. And when I'm researching, I prefer to keep everything in a spreadsheet and have rows for each source and a timeline that keeps track of all the events in order. So I thought, why don't I try taking this spreadsheet and uploading it to the AI chatbot and see what it can write? And so I was pleasantly surprised with what it can do. When we're writing and using AI to help us, we need to consider our audience. And knowing our audience can help us select the appropriate style and tone and type of genealogical writing. So just consider, what type of writing are you going to do? Are you writing for yourself? Are you writing for non-genealogists like family members or others in the community? Are you writing for your peers who are also genealogists? Are you writing for your family, your children, your siblings, your parents, the general public? And then think about the age of the intended audience. And sometimes you'll have a mixed range of ages, or sometimes maybe you are focusing specifically on children and teens or young adults. So think about that as well. And so an example prompt that you might give to an AI chatbot with this in mind is to take a piece of writing that you have and make it more appropriate for your audience, whether your audience is technical or non-technical, genealogists or not, young or old. An example I did was to change a narrative into a historically accurate story appropriate for children. So here's kind of an example of this. So I pasted in a narrative that I already had and then said, change this narrative into a historically accurate account appropriate for an 8-year-old child, explaining any historical and geographic context. For example, you could explain more about Kilwinning, Scotland County, Missouri, where Daniel was born. So adding that to the conversation, it says, once upon a time in a small town nestled in Scotland County, a little boy named Daniel O'Connell Elder was born. And they lived on a farm where they worked hard to grow crops and take care of animals. So you can see how ChatGPT has added in some language that is more appropriate for children that they would understand, that doesn't have vocabulary outside of their comprehension level. So within genealogy writing, we have several different types, from reports to narrative family histories and proof arguments. So let's define these. Within each type, we have descriptive biographical narrative. And this is just a fancy word for the type of writing that we do where we are talking about our ancestor as if we were writing a biography. And so to break down this large phrase, narrative just means sentences and paragraphs as opposed to data and notes where we have like a list of facts or we have a pedigree chart or a family group sheet. We take the information from those and we put them in sentences and paragraphs. And so this descriptive biographical narrative might include details about a person's or a family's activities, their residences, their circumstances, contributions, and lifestyle, in addition to vital statistics. This definition comes from Genealogy Standards by the Board for Certification of Genealogists. So when we're writing a narrative family history, the audience for that might be different than what it would be for a research report or a proof argument. So we'll go through each of these and talk about how they're different. Narrative family histories, the audience is going to be relatives, future generations, and other genealogists. And it's a compilation of biographical information about many people in a family. It usually has a more engaging style, which includes historical context, and can be more story-like or focus on specific themes. When you're creating a narrative family history with several chapters and a lot of people, you may want to include a numbering system to uniquely identify individuals within the family history. And so there are guides out there to tell us how to number our family histories to kind of use a system that's been proven and works. There are three types of narrative family histories: a genealogy that includes the descendants of an ancestral couple with more than one couple or family per generation. There's also a lineage where you can highlight descent from one person or couple, highlighting only one couple or family in each generation. So think of it as a line instead of like a big genealogy trickling down many lines. And then a pedigree is ascent from one person with more than one couple or family per generation. So this just starts with like yourself and then goes back on all the lines. So those are the types. And here's an example prompt that we might give to AI to help us as we're working on one of our genealogies or pedigrees that we're writing. Here's an example. You are an expert genealogist, and often when you talk with an AI chatbot, it helps to give them a role so that it activates that neural network of words that they're going to be using. Here is a timeline of, and then you can put the name, format the research subject, their name, and his children into a descending lineage using the modified register NGSQ genealogical numbering system. And then I went ahead and explained kind of the basic rules for how to number that. Each person gets an Arabic numeral. Start with the research subject as number one. The spouse doesn't get a number, but is mentioned along with number one. Each child of the subject is given a subsequent numeral, with the first child being number two. Provide additional birth order numbering for the children using lowercase Roman numerals next to their Arabic numeral. So this was quite an extensive prompt. It had a lot of directions. And when I gave it to ChatGPT, it struggled a little bit. But actually, I gave it to Claude, which is a similar program like ChatGPT, and it did a great job. So I had put in the facts about Daniel O'Connell Elder, and then I put in that prompt. And in the facts, it said all the names of his siblings, or sorry, his children and his wife. So Claude said, here's the descending lineage of Daniel O'Connell Elder using the modified register NGSQ genealogical numbering system. So one, we have Daniel O'Connell Elder, and then his birth and death and marriage, and then his wife's name. And then it has the children of Daniel and Jessie Estelle Ross. And I noticed this is formatted exactly how it would be in an article in the National Genealogical Society Quarterly. So that's good. So it seems to know how to do this. And then we have the next person is number two. So that's a unique number from number one. But then we have the children ordered with these lowercase Roman numerals, like I asked. So Claude did a great job here and helped me format my family history. Now, switching gears to a research report, this is a different type of writing. The audience would be yourself if you're writing a report for your own self, or it could be a client if you're doing professional research. It could be for other researchers you're collaborating with, and even relatives. Reports are technical writing and they're focused on a research objective. Maybe you have written an objective to find the parents of one of your ancestors, or to find their death date, or some specific piece of information. When you write the report, you write about the findings of one phase of research and you discuss sources. So you may have spent 30 hours or 2 months researching, and now you're closing this phase of research, writing a report, and then you can possibly do another phase of research, or you can conclude your research by writing a proof argument. Then within the report, you will have some biographical information and narrative writing about the identity of the person or the people. And you'll also show the steps taken to follow the research plan. You'll also write at the end, especially in the conclusion, whether or not the research objective was reached. So you could try learning more about how a research report looks by taking a narrative that you already have, pasting it in and saying, transform this narrative into a genealogy research report about this person's identity. Focus on the sources found and their reliability. So research reports really discuss sources a lot and what was found and how reliable they are. So here's an example going back to the example of Daniel O'Connell Elder. So up here we had the conversation where Claude wrote the numbering system out for Daniel O'Connell Elder and Jessie Estelle Ross and their children. So in the same conversation, I asked it to change that into a report about the person's identity. And so we get a title, Genealogy Research Report about Daniel O'Connell Elder, and then we have the research objective. So I didn't give it an objective, it just came up with one. The purpose of this research is to establish the identity of Daniel O'Connell Elder through the examination of various historical records and sources. The focus is on assessing the reliability of the sources. So actually I did. I said focus on the sources. So that's kind of what it used for the objective. But usually the objective would be a little bit more specific about what aspect of his identity do we want to establish, whether it's identifying him among other men of the same name or figuring out one piece of his identity, like who he married, who his children were, who his parents were, where he lived, something like that. But that's fine. Sources and reliability, we have his birth record, marriage record, and census record. Now, you should know that at the beginning of this conversation with Claude, I pasted in all the facts and sources from my ancestry profile page for this ancestor. So it has that information stored in its conversation's memory. So it does have the birth record and the marriage record, some census records, and it just discusses them with language that is more like a research report. The third type of writing is proof arguments, and the audience for this is sometimes other genealogists who are learning from your case study, or it could be relatives, especially those who may or may not agree with your conclusion, because if we feel the need to write a proof argument, sometimes that's because others don't agree with us. So you may be writing something to be very clear and to be persuasive. Proof arguments are technical writing and they present a case. You should be presenting evidence in a logical order. There will be biographical narrative, but it's often succinct and not as lengthy as a family history book would be. Maybe you'll have more condensed paragraphs that are just giving exactly what's needed to create the body of evidence to prove your case. It may not be as engaging because it's more technical. And a prompt example for this that you could give an AI chatbot would be to change this research report into a succinct technical writing for a genealogy proof argument that focuses on evidence and not on the sources used. So in proof arguments, usually you won't talk about the sources unless they're really important to the evidence. So you just talk about the person, and then the sources are all discussed and cited in the footnotes. So I prompted Claude in the same conversation as before to change this report into a succinct technical writing article for a genealogy proof argument that focuses on evidence. So now we have a proof argument to establish the identity of Daniel O'Connell Elder. And it gives us evidence for his birth, marriage, his residences, immigration, and death. So it's very similar to the research report. What has changed here is just the wording, and it doesn't talk about how reliable the sources are. So this example isn't really that good, but it does show you that you can get some ideas and some help with the language that you would want to use for different types of writing. And of course, you can apply this to other types of writing, whether you're writing a friendly letter or a blog post or whatever it is you're working on. All right, let's dive into the different aspects of using AI to help you with writing. And first, we'll talk about the ethical use of AI. Is it okay to have AI write everything for us? Should we disclose that we've used AI? There may be some uses of AI that are unacceptable, so it's good to think about those. Like, when would you not want to use it? For example, my children are asked not to use AI when their teachers have assigned them to write an essay. So they're learning how to write paragraphs and essays, so they shouldn't be using AI to help them do that because then they're taking credit for work they didn't do. Then, if you ever are being tested, maybe you're a professional seeking a credential and the credentialing body has asked the applicants to present only their own work and not the work of an AI chatbot. Although this is still being debated in the academic world and in the genealogy world, there are two credentialing bodies that I've been following that have given their ideas of what they would allow for AI. So my mother, Diana Elder, is accredited through the International Commission for the Accreditation of Professional Genealogists, ICAPGen, and they came out with a statement that said that some uses of AI would be allowed, but they don't want you using it to write your whole 4-generation report that you submit at the beginning of the process. And then BCG, the Board for Certification of Genealogists, they came out and said they don't want you using AI chatbots to write any part of your portfolio. And that's kind of what I was thinking too, because they clearly say they want you to do your own work. And if I have the chatbot do the work for me, it's not my own work anymore. So that wasn't too surprising. And then possibly if you're submitting to an academic journal, some may ban the use of AI tools to help you write, or they just want you to disclose it. As I researched this topic to find out what I wanted to do personally in my own writing, I found that there are some academic journals out there that have rules about it. Some have come up with a set um, kind of idea about if you've used AI to generate ideas, then you need to disclose that. Whereas if you've used AI just to help you with spell checking, then you don't need to disclose that. So some will have policy statements about that, and they're interesting to read. There's a couple in your handout that you could look at just to get some ideas if you're curious about that. And then we have to think about how to acknowledge the AI models if we're going to acknowledge that we've used them. The current consensus is that AI models cannot be listed as an author or a contributor because they're not human and they can't accept responsibility for the writing. So what the recommendation is to disclose the use of AI models in an introduction to your article, the appendix, or in the reference notes. Now, we can apply this to genealogy by just thinking about if we write something with AI, we may just want to put something at the end or at the beginning that says, this text was generated by Nicole Dyer using Claude. And so that our readers know that if there's a mistake there, it wasn't Nicole making that mistake, it was the AI. And sometimes I think we consider the AI to be a better writer than us, but actually it's the other way around. We are more intelligent than the artificial intelligence in a lot of ways, and especially in preserving our own way of writing and our own voice. So I think it's best that we do disclose when we've used it to write a significant portion of our text, because then people will know and not be confused why we don't sound like ourselves. In genealogy standards, it talks about giving credit and not assuming credit for others' words and ideas. So if you don't give credit to the model, you are claiming credit for work you didn't do. And Elizabeth Schoen Mills in Evidence Explained says that when we use generative AI to create text prompted images or narratives, the same expectations exist. We do not take credit for what we did not create. So in that section of Evidence Explained, she was talking about how we need to disclose the use of AI. So in conclusion of this section, we need to disclose and give credit to follow genealogy standards. And so the question arises, how can we give credit appropriately? So I have some recommendations. If you're going to cite that you've used an AI model by adding a citation in the footnotes, then here's some of the things that you may want to include. The Chicago Manual of Style says we should include the model name, the prompt or the topic, the company that made that model. So this would be OpenAI and this would be ChatGPT, and then the date of the conversation. And Evidence Explained, all about documentation of genealogy sources, says that we should include a layer for any source provided to the model. So let's say we provide a transcription of a will to ChatGPT, then we ask for a summary. Then we would cite that will in the usual way, and then we would cite the model that we've used. So for example, you could cite that you found a deed in the Family Search full text search, and then we provide a transcription of that deed. ChatGPT summarizes it. So then we first cite the deed, then we cite ChatGPT's summary. In your handout, there's an article by Hosseini, Resnick, and Holmes, and they say that it might be good to add the name of the person using the model, so your own name. And that is because sometimes when you have an account and you use the chatbot regularly, it remembers you and your preferences and may give you a slightly different response based on your history of conversations. We also need to include the version that we've used. So ChatGPT 3.5 versus 4 versus 4.0, and whatever the current model is that you used. So here's an example of a reference note citation that I created to cite a conversation I had with ChatGPT. I gave it the title that ChatGPT gave the conversation. Sometimes you can change this title, but ChatGPT will give every conversation that you have with it a title just based on what it thinks it's about. So it gave this title, and the model is ChatGPT version 4, chat with myself, Nicole Dyer, on this date. The company is OpenAI, and so that's the publisher. That's why it's in italics, just like you would italicize a book title. And then we have this share link so that anyone who clicks this link can read my chat with ChatGPT. Now, you don't have to do that, but for this particular citation, I wanted to share with you in the handout my conversation with ChatGPT about this. So I put the share link here, and you can generate a share link from ChatGPT, but you can't do it from the other chatbots like Claude. I don't believe allows that. So that's one thing I do like about ChatGPT. And then I put the access date, which you probably don't need to, but I put that. I'm just used to putting that for my citations in genealogy. All right. Now, lastly, when we're talking about using AI for writing assistance, how do we keep our own style and authenticity? So, maintaining personal style. Well, we all have our personal skills, our experience, our own unique style and tone, our personality, and that's going to be different from the style that the large language model or the chatbot uses. They have their own default style and tone. And if you want to discover what their default writing style is, you can ask the chatbot. So I asked ChatGPT, how might you describe your default writing style or tone? And ChatGPT says that its style and tone was designed to be clear, informative, and neutral, and helpful, concise yet comprehensive, polite and professional. Um, yeah. Then I said, you do have a polite and professional tone, but sometimes I think you're a bit wordy. How else can I describe your tone? Are there any drawbacks to your style? So then it responded with this list of 5 things that might be considered drawbacks: wordiness, which I had already noted, a lack of a personal touch, over neutral, complexity for varied audience levels, which isn't really a drawback, and then adaptability to tone requests. So this is interesting. While I strive to adapt to specific tone requests from users, my range may not fully capture the subtleties or specific emotional cues that a human writer could, possibly making some adapted responses feel less authentic. So if we want our writing to feel authentic, then we're not going to want to use ChatGPT by itself. We're going to want to use it to help us and not use it 100%. We'll want to edit the responses that we receive from ChatGPT, add in our own special tone, and kind of use it as a drafting tool. Have you heard of any of these tools to check if text is written by AI? Of course, teachers are scrambling to try to figure out if their students are doing their work or if they're using ChatGPT. So there are some tools out there that profess to detect if text is AI generated or not. And so as you start using chatbots and get used to their style, you may start to recognize text that isn't authentic or human. And this has happened to me several times, from a review that I read to an marketing email that I got, where I have noticed that, oh, this was definitely written by ChatGPT. And sometimes you can just tell from the formatting markup that was used, or just by the bulleted lists, because AI loves to make bulleted lists. But sometimes they just use the same type of phrases and you can just tell that it was AI generated. Well, when you're still learning how to do that, or you're not sure if it's AI generated, you can try copying and pasting the text into one of these AI detectors, and it will tell you 100% is AI generated. And sometimes it will give you partially human written, partially AI generated. And it's obviously going to be wrong sometimes. Some people can just write with an AI sounding style. And this happened to one of my friend's daughters who is in high school, and she submitted an essay that she wrote herself. And the professor put it into here, and it came up with 60% AI generated and 40% human written. And the professor gave her an F, or the teacher gave her an F, and she was really devastated. So we're in kind of a challenging time where teachers are having to do this kind of AI detection, and it's difficult for them and it's difficult for the students. Well, if you take a story that AI has generated, like the one that we generated for a child, and paste that into Zero GPT, then you can find out if it thinks it's AI generated. When I tried that, it said 100% was generated by AI. So here's that answer here. I actually used Quillbot, their AI content detector. And so it says this was 100% generated by AI, which is true. So how do we get around this? How do we use AI but still preserve our unique voice? So obviously we want to be careful not to use our unique authorship, knowledge, style, and tone. When we have our unique experiences and writing style, we want that to be part of our writing. But one thing we can try to do is to train the chatbot in our own style. So what I've done in the past is uploaded my own research report and said, use the same style and wording that this report uses. Another thing we can do is fact check and review very carefully to make sure that our expertise is not watered down as we use AI to help us. So if we have AI summarize a will that we transcribed, we want to check that transcription or check the summary to make sure that nothing is lost there. Um, I read an article by Lindsay Weick, a history professor, who felt like she was very wordy in her writing. So she was using AI to help with that and make her sentences more concise. But one thing she noticed after using it for a while is that the sentences that were coming out, although they were more concise, some of her expertise was getting watered down and some things didn't make sense anymore, or they were just too generic to be helpful. So we do have to be careful of that. So here's kind of a way that I use AI to help me draft text. I will have a paragraph generated by the chatbot. Notice it's not perfect, and then I'll refine it with additional prompts. So I'll say, um, here's a here's an idea of what I want this paragraph to say. And then as I read the response, I'll say, oh, I don't like that part. Let's get rid of that word. So I refine the paragraph in that conversation and say, well, get rid of that first sentence and then add a section about this. And then it will write it again. So I think of the chatbot as kind of like my writing assistant, where I give it something to do, then I check it. And if I don't like it, I say rework it. And the final edits are the manual edits that I do to find specific words and phrases that I don't love, fix those up, change things around, and then it's ready to use. So sometimes I'll generate a paragraph or a section of a family history or a report like this. So an example prompt would be to tell the chatbot to update this narrative to be closer to my style. I am less whimsical and more down to earth. Don't be so flowery and overly positive, and use simpler sentences. So here's an example, and I'll zoom in a little bit. So I'm trying to refine this story about Daniel O'Connell Elder for children to make it not be so flowery. So I said use simpler sentences. So it gave me kind of a more basic story here. Daniel O'Connell Elder was born on May 7th, 1855 in Kilwinning, a small town with friendly folks in rolling hills. He grew up on a farm where life revolved around hard work and caring for animals. They moved around a lot. Life had its ups and downs. So see, it's not so positive anymore. Um, it was trying to paint everything in flowery lens. Well, after I asked ChatGPT to change this to be a little bit less flowery, I put it into the free AI detector and it said it was only 72% likely to be AI generated. So it sounds less like an AI, which is good. And it says it was partly human written, but it was all still written by AI, but I did refine it so that it sounded less like ChatGPT and more like myself because I said I'm not so flowery and I'm not so overly positive. So hopefully that gives you some ideas for taking what's written by AI and making it more authentic to how you write. Let's talk now about the different large language models available and how they can help us. So a definition of large language model is that it's a type of artificial intelligence that can understand and create text that sounds like it was written by a human. It learns from large amounts of text to predict and generate responses, helping it to answer questions and hold conversations on many topics. Okay, so now that you know what a large language model is, let's talk about three of them. The first is ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is created by OpenAI, and they do have a free version that lets you do a lot of things. And even if you don't have an account with them, you can still use their 4.0 mini model. So you can test it out without even creating an account. However, if you want to get all of the features available, then you need to create a free account and log in every time you use it. which I recommend that you do. And it does not allow you to upload files if you're not logged in. So if you want to upload a timeline that you have or some kind of file rather than copying and pasting it, then you'll need to log in. Otherwise, you can just copy and paste in your text. If you are logged in, then you can upload files like a PDF file or an Excel file, a CSV file, and you have access to some of the advanced tools like the advanced data analysis and all kinds of different advanced tools. And they do limit the number of conversations you can have in a day if you're on the free plan. So if you come up on the limit and you're frustrated, you may want to upgrade. Otherwise, you may just want to wait till the next day. Then if you have the paid version, which is $20 a month, you can have additional conversations in the day. You don't ever usually run out. And you can even create and share custom GPTs, which are chat GPTs that have custom instructions. And so then you can share those with others in the OpenAI store. And right now they're all just free to everyone, but maybe someday they will be paid. But you don't need to have a paid account in order to use other people's custom GPTs. So if you search in the GPT store at OpenAI, you can type in genealogy and you can see custom GPTs that other people have made and shared that have really great instructions written into them. One example of this is the locality guide custom GPT. So if you're working on creating and researching the locality that you're using for a research project, like perhaps you're working in Rowan County, North Carolina, and you want to make a locality guide to help you with genealogy research there, this custom GPT can help you do that. And so that was created by Mark Thompson. And he's one of the co-hosts of the Family History AI podcast. So I highly recommend his work. One thing about ChatGPT is that it tends to generate additional sentences beyond the information that you provide to it. So sometimes it can be kind of wordy, or it will editorialize, it will add things, it will make inferences that you didn't really want it to. So that's kind of a quirk that I've noticed about it. In some ways, you want a chatbot to be generating a lot of sentences, and other times you don't want it to make anything else up. You just want it to do exactly what you said to do. So depending on your usage, it's a little more creative than some of the others. ChatGPT does allow you to generate a share link for your chat. So if you're generating a good conversation and you feel like sharing it with somebody, you can do that in ChatGPT. Okay, another large language model that's very popular and very good is Claude by Anthropic. Anthropic is a breakoff of OpenAI. So you'll notice that Claude and ChatGPT have a lot of similarities, but it also has some unique differences that make it, in my opinion, a little bit better for genealogical writing. So the free version of Claude allows you to upload CSV files and other files, but you will have a limited number of messages. As far as I know, you can't use Claude unless you are logged in. And so I don't think they have the other option like ChatGPT to use it without logging in. If you do have a paid plan with Claude, Claude Pro gives you 5 times more usage and priority access, and you can choose which model you want to use. And then they have this option for Claude projects, which are similar to custom GPTs. And I really like Claude projects. They have a larger memory for conversation, so you can upload, like maybe you have 3 research reports about one person in your family, and you can upload all 3 of those, and then you can ask it, pull out all the evidence that I've found so far in these 3 research reports that the father of Lucindrilla Keaton was William Keaton. And then it will bullet a list and tell you which report it was found in and give you that information. I like that the output tends to be less wordy and more concise than ChatGPT, and it strives to be succinct. But if you want it to, it will give you more thorough explanations when prompted. So that's one of the reasons I like Claude. Also, it just tends to make less inferences and add in less hallucinations, which means, making stuff up. The third large language model is Google Gemini. The free version of Gemini uses 1.5 Flash, which is their model with a 32 kilobyte context window. So this gives you plenty of memory to have long conversations. but it does not allow you to upload files, only images. In the paid plan with Gemini Advanced, you get to use their Pro model, and it has a huge memory, a 1 million token context window. So you can upload a book with like 1,000 pages and then ask it to extract information, write summaries of the chapters. And so like if you have a county history that's in the public domain that you got from Google Books or Family Search Books, you can totally use Gemini to help you understand it if you have the paid version. Gemini Advanced also will do Python code, just like ChatGPT and Claude, which I didn't really mention for those, but the advanced data analysis function of ChatGPT is this. It does this. It runs and edits Python code. You don't even have to know how to really use Python code. It will just do it for you and then give you the results of it. So it's pretty great. And you can upload and analyze files. Free users can just copy and paste into Gemini. And one thing I like about it is that it works with Google Docs and Google Sheets with a sidebar. So if you're writing in a Google Doc and you want a summary of what you're writing, you can have it do that. And it works even with the free plan. Okay, a note about privacy. Do not put sensitive info about living people in the chatbot unless you've opted out of the training. The training just means that they take all the conversations you have and give them back to employees at the company like OpenAI or Anthropic and Google. And then they use those conversations to train the chatbot to do better. The way that it works with OpenAI is that you have to go in your settings and turn off chat history. Once you've done that, it won't use your conversations for training. And then for Anthropic's Claude, it actually doesn't use your conversations to train the model unless they're flagged or you give feedback like a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And then Google Gemini, you just have to opt out, go into activity, and then turn off saving activity. Okay, now the last section of this lecture is writing from timelines with AI. Now I chose this because most of us have timelines of our ancestors, whether it's one that's been generated by our software program, by Family Search, our online tree at Ancestry, whatever it is, we usually will have some form of timeline, whether we've made it ourselves or got it from our program. And so often I will write a timeline in order to help me plan a writing project and put everything in chronological order. I usually create my timeline at the start of a phase of research when I'm doing client research or my own project. I will put everything that I currently know into chronological order in Airtable. And Airtable is just like a spreadsheet, but it's a relational database. And this really helps with research planning because once you've created a timeline, you can really see the gaps in your information and what you need to do to find more sources. Here's an example of a timeline that I created in Airtable. You can see that Airtable is just like Excel or Google Sheets where you have rows and columns, and I'll have an event and the people involved, the date, the event type, the place, the friends, family, associates, and neighbors, the details, and the source citation. And so I've got several events here, tax records and deeds, and a probate record. And this is just one part of my timeline. So I've got a lot of facts here about John West. So what I did is I exported this timeline from Airtable and saved it as a CSV file, comma separated values. So it will take each of these and put commas in between them. And then I uploaded that CSV timeline to ChatGPT 4 and gave it the prompt that says, you are an expert genealogist, skilled at writing about historical people using only the facts provided and not editorializing. Using this spreadsheet, write a paragraph about John West's life in Fauquier County, Virginia. So it went ahead and looked at my timeline and then it wrote this. It's like one large paragraph. And it was kind of general. It also kind of added in some things like John West was a notable figure in Fauquier County, Virginia, which isn't true. He was just a regular citizen of the county. He wasn't particularly wealthy. He didn't own like that much more land than his neighbors. So he wasn't notable. So right away, I noticed that this is not exactly how I would want it. So what I needed to do was do a different prompt. So I said, good. Can you list all the information from the CSV file for row 1 about the 1787 deed? And so then it looked at my timeline and gave me that information. And then, um, oh, sorry, this is still me talking. I explained what my timeline included. And I said the first column, event, has a description of the row in this format: people, record type, date, and place. For example, Humphrey Arnold, John West, Gustavus Brown Horner, deed, 20 April 1787. Can you use that information to create a sentence for each row in the timeline? So that was going to help me see exactly what my timeline has in order. So then um, it created those using advanced data analysis. And you can tell that it did that because it has this little blue bracketed caret with an underscore showing that it used its advanced data analysis or Python code. And so it analyzed my spreadsheet with a Python code and then generated sentences. So that's going to reduce any hallucinations, any made up information, and just focus on exactly what my spreadsheet says. And then it gave me 26 sentences, and this is what it looked like. So this is the data analysis using Python code. And I didn't have to know really anything about this other than I wanted it to make specific sentences and tell it to do that. And then it created the code and executed the code. And then the result was 26 sentences. Humphrey Arnold, John West, blah, blah, blah. And it just kind of puts everything into a basic sentence. So then I said, right here, using these 26 sentences, can you create a narrative account of John West's dealings in Fauquier County? And so then we have a little bit of a better narrative that isn't so flowery and positive, making him seem like a notable figure. So it starts off John West Sr., let me zoom in. John West Sr.'s life and activities in Fauquier County, Virginia, unfold through a series of legal and financial records that sketch a vivid picture of his engagements from 1787 to 1805. So it does a lot better. His involvement begins on April 20th, 1787, as he, alongside Humphrey Arnold and Gustavus Brown Horner, partakes in a deed transaction, making his early presence within the county's economic landscape. So still a bit flowery, but better than before. And so this is what I just read. And then as the years progress, John West's financial responsibilities are recorded through annual tax documents, starting from May 9th, 1787. So it continues on in that way. It has a significant turning point, comes in 1790. So it still isn't really how I would have written it. So I tried again. And my next prompt was, here's how I would write about row one. On 20 April 1787, John West witnessed the sale of 26 acres from Humphrey Arnold and Nanny, his wife, to Gustavus Brown Horner. Wiley Roy was listed in the deed as a previous landowner. John Mozzie and Seymour Arnold witnessed the deed along with John West. The source for this deed is Fauquier County, Virginia, deeds 9, and so forth. Can you write a paragraph in this style from row 2? So what I've done here is I've provided an example for ChatGPT, and giving an example of how you want it to sound is really helpful because it's trying to do what I want here, but it doesn't really know exactly how I want it because I haven't been very specific. So I'm telling it, this is how I want you to do it. So now it's really good at copying an example. So then we have this next paragraph that it wrote from row 2, and it says on 9 May, and it kept the genealogical date format. John West was documented in the tax records of Fauquier. The record detailed West as responsible for one male over 21, suggesting he was the sole adult male in his household subject to taxation at that time. Then it continues on and gives the citation. Then I said, good, follow that style for row 3, and it kept going on. So now finally I have usable narrative that is more in my style that I can copy and paste into a research report from my timeline. Okay, so I said in my prompt, I will provide you with a section of biographical narrative about John West. And then I said, how might you change the style to be more appropriate for a non-genealogist? How can you make this more engaging without losing important details and without sounding too silly? So then I pasted the information that I had generated with ChatGPT before. And then it gave me this response or this response, and I could pick the one that I prefer. So they were pretty similar. but it was helpful to see that I can take what I wrote, which is very technical and good for a research report, and convert that into something more appropriate for a story or for a family history for family members. Okay, one last example of writing from a timeline is about my Dyer family. Baldy Dyer is a potential ancestor. I haven't linked him to my husband's third great grandfather, but there are some DNA matches pointing to him. So I've done a research project to identify him a bit. He was in the War of 1812, and his pension names his children. I wanted to identify the children and carry them forward to find any living descendants. That proved very challenging because they all seemed to scatter from Davidson County, Tennessee to other parts of Tennessee after their father died. So here's the timeline that I had. I created this timeline just with the starting point that I had about Baldy Dyer, including his pension, his death, a couple birth dates from family trees that I found online, which, are authored sources with secondary information, but it's still something to start from. So I took this and saved it as a CSV file. Then I went to Claude because I really like how Claude writes. I feel like its writing is a little bit more conducive to genealogical writing and a little bit less creative, a little bit more factual because it focuses on what I provided instead of adding in additional things. So I provided this CSV file of my Baldy Dyer timeline and said, you are an expert genealogist. Read this timeline about the starting point known at the beginning of a research phase about Baldy Dyer and quote the column headers for the log. And then it went ahead and read the column headers. And so I just do this to see if it can read and understand my CSV file. And then it just kind of talks about it, some different things it noticed in the column headers. Then the next thing that I asked is to read the first row of the timeline and quote its contents exactly and fully. And I had to start doing this because I noticed that the chatbot sometimes would not read the full row. Sometimes it would um, only read part of it, and so it wasn't giving all the information. And so I got frustrated. So I had to get really strict with the Claude chatbot and tell it to read the whole row and quote it back to me, and then write a sentence from this row now that I can see it was reading it correctly. So the sentence it wrote, and I did ask it to create a footnote so that I could copy and paste it into my Word document with footnotes. And it used Markdown for that, which was great. So I said, can you write a sentence about Baldy Dyer from this row of the timeline and use Markdown to place a footnote with the source citation below? And it says, according to a public member tree on Ancestry.com, Baldy Dyer was born in 1764 in Charles, Maryland. Then it has the citation that I made in my timeline to this ancestry tree. So this was great. This is exactly what I want. And I was excited that I could generate this with my timeline. So then I said, good job. Now read each of the rows of the CSV file and create sentences just like this. And be sure to include the footnotes and markdown with the source citation below. So now I've got several sentences, all with footnotes of my citations and telling me everything from my timeline in chronological order with footnotes. And so this was just amazing. And then this last one was even longer because it had more information in that row about the pension roll. Okay, so I scrolled down to the bottom of the response and I'll zoom in, and it put the footnotes below. It used IBID for repeated sources. And then it went all the way down to 18 and finished up. And then I said, very good, let's try something else. Take the sentences you wrote and put them into a coherent paragraph. If any facts are about the same person, group them together. Be sure to include footnotes in Markdown. So then we got a more coherent paragraph instead of distinct sentences. So what I learned from this is that doing things step by step and kind of getting it ready, like you would tell a very an assistant who needs to be walked through each step, worked well. So when I asked for that paragraph, I got this. Baldy Dyer, born in 1764 in Charles, Maryland, married his first wife, Sophronia, or Sophie, in 1782 in Halifax, Virginia. He had several children with her, including Archibald, Samuel, James, John, and Matthew. Baldy Dyer later married his second wife, Mary Polly Taylor, in Davidson. Tennessee. She was born in 1765 in Maryland. The couple had several children, including Willie, James, Simpson, William, David, and Susanna. Baldy Dyer served as a private in the 39th Regiment of Infantry and died in 1814 in Florida. His heirs and so forth. So this was great. This is actually a paragraph I could really use. And then the footnotes were down below. Now, how do I take that? This is text in Claude. So I can select all this text and paste it into Word, but that actually doesn't work very well. You need a tool to help you. So the tool that I found that helps with this is called Writage. And Writage helps you take this Markdown, which is a markup language for making formatted text, and that's what Claude and ChatGPT uses. And it adds little asterisks to make bold text, and it adds carets to make footnotes with brackets around it. So once you see this simple syntax for Markdown, you'll notice it when you copy and paste things out of these chatbots. And because I use Word as my word processor, I wanted to paste from Claude and ChatGPT into Word. And Writage is a plugin for Word. This is software that you can purchase and download and install so that it works as a tab within the Microsoft Word ribbon. And it allows you to paste this Markdown from ChatGPT into a Word document. You can try it for 14 days. I did that and I loved it, so I purchased it for $29. And it's not a subscription, it's a one-time fee. This is the website for Writage. And if you use Word and you want to use ChatGPT, I highly recommend it. So here is what it kind of looks like if you just paste the Markdown into Word without using Writage. You see the carets and the brackets, and that's what it looks like. So let's see. If I paste that text from Claude into Word, it looks like this. It has asterisks and it has these side carets for bulleted lists, and it has the carets and the brackets for footnotes. But if I want it to preserve the formatting, then I can use the Writage plugin. So here's a video showing that. I click on the Writage tab, and so I click Paste Markdown. And now I have bolded headers and I have the footnotes at the bottom of the page. So that's just like magical and a very helpful tool. So all of this text was generated by Claude and pasted into Word using the Writage plugin. And all I had to do was create my timeline and upload it to Claude and prompt Claude to write for me. So I think we're out of time, but I will quickly go through this last exercise because it's something you can all try at home. So if you have an online tree or a family tree program that creates a timeline for you, go to that family tree. This is Family Search where I have my tree. Well, it's the one big tree that anyone can edit. So I have some ancestors on there. So I went to the timeline tab. Oops, go back. And copied and pasted all of this timeline information that's generated based on the sources and pasted that into Google Gemini and said, you are an expert genealogist. I'd like to give you a timeline about my ancestor and have you create a genealogical narrative and paragraphs about him. Please include each fact in the timeline, and please add only widely known historical and geographic facts for context. Then I pasted that and gave it this information from the Family Search timeline. Then it went ahead and generated a biography called Elam Hollingsworth, A Life on the Move. And it talks about how he was born in Vermilion Township, Indiana, into a Quaker family, which is not what it said in the timeline. So if I go back, it actually says that he was born in a town called Quaker, but I can see how Gemini might not understand that. Quaker town doesn't have the label of town next to it, so it just assumed or inferred that he was born to a Quaker family. It actually was true, but I want to be sure that it's not making inferences. So we just have to fact check these things. Another thing that I noticed is that it asked me to choose a draft. So I could say, do I want draft 1, draft 2, or 3? There were 3 options of how it could write it. So that was nice. Another thing I noticed as I was fact checking the narrative is that it had this kind of weird paragraph about how he moved back and forth after migrating, which I didn't think was true. It says in the 1870 census, he was back in Indiana for a time, but then he went to Nebraska again. And so I checked the sources attached, and he never went back to Indiana after he moved to Nebraska. So this was just a fact that had been added when someone attached a source incorrectly, and then the fact remained when someone unattached the wrong source. So if you put in a bad timeline with sources that are wrong, you're going to get incorrect paragraphs. So that's something to be aware of. But it was helpful for me to see something I needed to clean up in the family search profile for Elam Hollingsworth. So I went and deleted that fact. One thing that's cool about Gemini is that it has this double check response button down here at the bottom. And when you click on that G, it will try to search for any of these phrases in Google and see if it can find sources for them. The way that large language models works is that it doesn't just like go in its memory and find 3 specific sources and then write something. But I gave it the timeline to write from, so that's the source, but it can try to look for similar things on the internet to see if it can find sources for you. And the green means that it found something, and the brown means that it didn't find. And if you click on it, it will tell you more about what everything means. So green means Google search found content that's likely similar, and brown means it didn't find anything. And another tool that I like about Gemini is that you can export your response to a Google Doc or an email. All right, now I don't have time to talk about this, but what I ended up doing with my timeline that I created in Claude for Baldy Dyer is I turned that into an entire report by using my timeline and my research log, which was a separate CSV, to generate an entire report about Baldy Dyer from previous research where I had never written the report. I just had put it into a research log. And then I was able to add the objective myself and then have Claude write the conclusion based on the findings, whether or not the objective was met. It wrote the results summary for me based on the uploaded draft of the report and gave me a list of future research based on notes that I had made within the research log about what to do next. So this entire report was written by Claude and myself from my research log. So that was a really interesting and fun usage of it. And this little video is going to show you how I asked for it to summarize the findings section of the report for my conclusion. So it generated that and then summarized the negative results, and it summarized where I didn't find anything, then make a bulleted list summarizing the findings. So then rewrite it so that there are action verbs at the start of each bullet point. So then it did that, and I was impressed. It was a helpful writing assistant for making this report. And then I did a couple things like summarizing different files that it had not really fully covered and the future research. And this is what the report looked like when I was all done. And I pretty much pasted it from Claude with just a few updates, to the headers. And that was it. So this was great. Of course, I needed to fact check things and make sure I didn't have any errors. But because of my careful prompting, it didn't bring in a lot of errors. So this was a great way to use AI to help me with some of the tasks that I do all the time, which is writing research reports. So I encourage you guys to think about what you do. What kind of writing do you constantly do with your genealogy? And think of ways that AI can help you with tasks that you're constantly doing. And the best way to use AI tools now is to provide facts and timelines and things that you've already written so that it can use that and write from it instead of asking it to do research. We don't really want to ask it to go do research on our ancestors. It will just make things up to please us. So we have to be careful of those hallucinations. Hopefully you got these takeaways that descriptive biographical narrative is what we have in a lot of types of writing in genealogy. So AI can help with that. We don't want to take credit for writing we didn't do. So in my report, I did put at the beginning in the limitations that this report was generated by Claude AI with prompts from Nicole Dyer using previously created timeline and research log. And that was a limitation because it could have introduced errors. And we want to go back. We want to preserve our own writing style and voice. Prompt chaining, which means giving it multiple steps to do, um, and kind of checking things and then giving it another prompt to help it to know what to do next, can help the model achieve greater accuracy. And we always need a fact check to see that the generated text is correct. Markdown, the formatting language used by AI, can be easily pasted into Word with writage. And often our writing can be made more efficient with AI tools. So those are the takeaways from today's class, and I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you for being here, and go
Be-
try
be-
writing with
Before,
AI.
before we're a little bit over time, but I would like to ask people if you have any questions, quick ones. Nicole
Yeah,
Pro,
sorry I went so long.
yeah, if you have any questions, anybody, you can unmute yourself and then ask questions. If you don't have any questions, I'll ask a couple. So when you say conversation, you mean prompt, or it's different? These two terms are different, or that you give the ChatGPT or whatever the prompt that you call conversation, or conversation is a little bit different.
I couldn't understand your question. Could you type it in the chat?
Okay, I don't want to take time.
It was hard to hear you fully. You're kind of a little bit like,
Uh,
is your
so,
microphone farther away from it? Like, could you speak into your microphone better?
okay. So the question was prompt and conversation are synonymous, or these are two different things?
Prompts and conversations?
Because you use conversation and prompt interchangeably. So my question is the
Okay. Yeah, I get your question now. Thank you. So the prompt is what you write to the chatbot, and the conversation is the entire discussion between you and the chatbot. So it includes your prompt and the responses from the chatbot, and then any further prompts that you give it. So it's basically you talking would be the prompts, and then the conversation would be the entire discussion back and forth.
basically prompt what you generate after the first one, the second one, and something like this, and then the chat GPT, let's put it as an example, they
Mhm.
respond, and you have another prompt, that's the conversation, the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing is you used uh, Excel files and stuff like this to download. Can you use imagery, or you can't with these uh, tools?
Great question, Irene. Yes, you can create images with ChatGPT. You can upload a picture to all
Mhm.
three of these, and it will analyze the picture for you. So you can
Mhm.
definitely do that.
Oh, okay. With all of them?
All of
Gemini,
them.
all of them. And it looks like you prefer Claude. You prefer it for
For
the
writing.
writing or in general?
For writing, and then ChatGPT I prefer for most other things for its data analysis, the Python code. And
Mm,
for analysis of images and creation of images, I prefer ChatGPT.
but for writing, that's Claude.
Mhm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think that's all my questions, but it looks like nobody else is has questions for now, because it's so much information we have to digest it. But thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was very informative, very good, very interesting, I would say. So I
All
hope
right.
everybody will go, well, after I send the email with the link, will go to your website and check your blog, which is really full of information and stuff like this. Thank you so much again. And thank you for everybody who came to our webinar. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye.